What's up, guys? In this video, we're going to cover WebSockets. So what are WebSockets? Why do you need them? When should you use WebSockets? What's so important about real-time communication? Everything. So jumping in, we have WebSockets, right? This is an example of when you would use WebSockets. You have a user here. You have the server here, right? You have an auction website or a chat platform. But say in this example, you have the auction website. You want to update this price, this bid, when user one bids. However, that updates for this user, user one. However, all the other users do not have the updated price yet. So what you need to do, basically, logically speaking, is have the user place the bid. That WebSocket connection activates, sends a signal to the server. The server then sends back to the client and updates that price to whatever it may be, say $14, and it updates automatically on the fly for all clients. Another example would be a chat message scenario. So you have client one, client two. Client two, this is a button, that's the text input. They type out their message, they send the input, that gets sent to user two. However, if user two does not refresh the page, for example, they won't have that message. So you want real-time communication. This is so important for a chat application because you don't want people refreshing the page. They're going back and forth with dialogue, right? So you don't want them to have to refresh. This is WebSockets. I'm going to teach you how to use it, code and theory. Let's get started. All right, guys, we're going to use this boilerplate here. It is a HTML5 JavaScript CSS boilerplate. So in this boilerplate, this basically saves us the time of configuring all of this and setting this up. So I'll include this in the YouTube description. You're just going to clone this repository. So I'm going to open iTerm, which is a secondary editor. If you're on Mac, you can just do terminal, this terminal right there. Up to you, totally your preference. So it's just loading. Zoom this in and resize this and we'll be good to go. So basically this is going to expedite the development so we can just purely focus on the WebSockets. All right, so I'm going to do cd documents ls. Okay, we're going to git clone and then paste this. I don't know why the paste ain't working. Let's clone that again. And there we go. I'm going to just keep it as the HTML5 boilerplate name. I'm a bit sick, so bear with me. I want to make some content, but I'm not feeling the best. Okie dokie. We have our project clone here, the HTML5 boilerplate. What we're going to do is we're going to cd into the HTML5 boilerplate, ls that, so we can see our files and folders here. If you cd into the source, a lot of these files we don't need, so you can just ignore a lot of this. But if you look here and you ls in the source folder, the src, you can see that we have the JavaScript folder right here, and then we have the image folder right here. The CSS, I believe, was on the outside layer. If not, we'll create that, or we'll just create a file. But what we're going to do is cd out into, so you can see I'm here in the main, I'm in my documents in the HTML5 boilerplate. We're going to make directories and call it server. This is going to be just a generic Node.js server, just basic core bare bones server. And we're going to cd into the server. We're going to npm init. Well, actually, let's touch. Touch creates a file. Let's touch server.js and then npm init. And then you're just going to continue through all these prompts. But where it asks you for the entry point, it should automatically assign it to server.js. Just make sure that that entry point is correct and continue onwards. Now that we have the node modules and the package.json initialized or created in the server.js file, now we need to npm I, shorthand for install or I, and we're going to install express Nodemon. Nodemon allows for the refreshing or changes on the server side without having to stop and start the program again. And then we're going to install WS for WebSockets. All right, let's go ahead and configure our server now. So I'm going to do code for Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to do server.js. And that command is not found, so I need to go into Visual Studio, and we're going to have to open this manually. So I'm going to drag this here. This is a different project I'm working on. And we're going to open folder. express or boilerplate. We're going to open the whole thing. So now we need to go into the server right here. I believe that's all I opened actually. Let's open the whole project. Express HTML5 boilerplate. That's what it was. All right. So see, we have our server right here. Go into the server.js, and we're going to do const. Let me zoom this in. Make this more legible. Const express equals require express. I'm going to assume you have basic knowledge on programming JavaScript and what this means, but basically we're importing our express dependency and assigning it to the express variable. We're also going to import const ws equals require, and then we're going to import the WebSockets. We also want to create the port in capital letters to assign that as a fixed variable. Const is a fixed variable, but port will not change, so that's going to be uppercase. And we're going to assign that to 8000, well, process env port, or default to 8000 if the port production is not found. All right, we're going to do app. We need to create the app actually. So const app equals, and then call express, call that express function. And then we're going to do app listen, and then we're going to pass it the port and a callback here, and then we're going to say a console log, a template literal, so we can inject that port variable. It's a string, so we can inject that. You are listening on port, and then port. Okay. Now, this is the basic setup that we'll need. We're going to add more stuff here, but this is the core configuration, essentially. So we can now run our server with this logic right here. We're going to add WebSocket logic to it later. But if you look in the package JSON, node start server.js, we're going to change that to Nodemon, so that way it refreshes on the fly. If we go back to our terminal, we can do npm run start. And there's our server. So running on port 8000. All right, now let's jump in. We need to start the front end or see if that loads. So let's go to our files now. We're going to start the front end project. So make this bigger. And I'm going to go to my documents. Boilerplate here. And then I'm going to double click on the index HTML, which should be in the source, I believe. Right there. So just give that a double click, and that will open your HTML5 boilerplate. All right, guys, we're going to break down some theory here and some concepts before we jump back into the code. So you have two different concepts. You have a thing called polling. You have polling, and then you have WebSockets. WebSockets is bidirectional, which means it goes both ways. It communicates back and forth and back and forth, whereas polling is a concept where you can set up a HTTP request, and this request will make a request via an API every say 5 or X seconds. The reason why we don't want to use polling for real-time communication is there's a slight lag. So even if you do, say you do 1 second or 3 seconds, that's still very labor intensive. This polling is very labor intensive, and it requires an API request to do that. Whereas the WebSocket communication establishes a communication between the server and the clients, and that persists constantly. It persists. You can't. That's not very legible, but the server and the client go back and forth and back and forth nonstop. So that's the difference between polling and WebSockets. Why don't we want to use polling? Very labor intensive. It's going to bog down the server, and it's just unnecessary. We want real-time communication live on the fly, everything to update on command, or when the change occurs, essentially. So that's why we are going to use WebSockets. All right, so there's a couple more things, and then we'll jump back into the code. With WebSockets, you basically have, let me try to explain this the best I can, the process of connecting, persisting, etc. I've already briefly explained this, but you have a client, a client, a client. When they load that browser, when that web app loads, it's going to, this is the server, it's going to try to make a connection to that server. It's going to automatically send that connection, that WebSocket connection. And then that server sends back the OK, right? And then we have that connection. And all of these clients do the same thing. And so once they're connected, all of that real-time, that polling we don't need, all that real-time bidirectional communication starts to occur. And what happens is basically if we have that connection established and it persists, which it does, it'll persist as long as that browser is open, as long as that browser is open, as long as that browser is open. And if you close that and open a new browser or tab or whatever, once you load the web application again, it'll then try to make that connection again. So in a WebSockets connection, like in a request, if you're sending a signal versus an HTTP request, we're sending basically a request and a payload. Or sorry, headers. We're sending the headers and the payload. Now, the payload is very important because the payload contains all that information that is going to go back to the server. So basically, we send a payload, and whatever that payload consists of or contains is what will be relayed back to every client. So it's very important that we include relevant information. So say in the auction aspect, like say this is an auction website, we got a bunch of data, right? That's the price right there. When we send the payload, we would send stuff. We would send properties like the ID, the date, obviously the price, the username of the bidder. We would also send the user ID, stuff of that nature. But all of that is going to be transmitted back to all of the clients, and then that will essentially update the real-time data, essentially. Or it'll make the data real-time, and it'll update all the clients simultaneously. So back in the code now, we need to do 3 more things. We need to basically set up the WebSockets on the server, and then set it up on the client side, and build an input so we can send the signal, and then we'll be good to go. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're basically going to create the WebSocket handler. Now, what does that mean? We need to create basically the connection. So we're going to do at the very top here, we're going to create another variable, and it's going to be WSS, and then new capital W WebSocket server, the capital S. And then we're going to pass it server. And then we're going to concatenate that because we're going to copy that, paste that down here, and we're going to assign const server to the app listen. And we also need to reassign the WS for WebSockets to capital WebSocket. And that will have our server up and listening still and have the WebSocket communication working, the WebSocket communication. So we see our server's still listening after it reloads the changes here. And so if we toggle back, what we need to do now is use this WebSocket connection to WSS on and then connection. So this basically creates the server, the WebSocket server, and then now we're going to use that server to basically, on the connection, do a callback. And then what we need to do is take that variable, WebSocket, pass that variable into the callback, do console log client connected, so we can see that if this client connected. So if we save that right now, we go back to the terminal, we're not going to see no clients connected. However, if we open up, where did that go? If we open up the index.html, we can actually see that we'll get a client connected. So let me open that HTML file. It's going to be right here. And if we go back to the server, we don't have a client connected. Oh, right. We need to do the front end logic. But theoretically, that's when the client would connect. So now what we need to do, whoops, because the WebSocket on the client does not have a reaching out to the WebSocket connection yet, so it's not going to connect. We need to do WS for the variable value, the passed back here, and then we're going to do on message, another callback message, and then console log to make sure this works, message. And then what we're going to do here is we also need to close this, so WS on close, and then another callback here, and then console log connection closed. This should be good for now. So give that a save, make sure the server is still running, and it is. And now what we need to do is we need to work on the client side. So let's go ahead and go to the index HTML, which should be in the source, and then right there, index HTML. So what we want to do, because right now, as you saw before, all we have is this. We need an input to send the WebSocket signal. So we're just going to do a very simplistic input on change, and then we'll just leave that empty for now. And value, I don't need that. We just need placeholder, enter your value, and we'll just close it off. And then we'll do a button on click, leave that empty, and we'll just close that, click me to send. So now if we reload the HTML, we'll have the value and then the input to send. Now we do need to do one thing. We don't need this on change, but we do need to do, we need to assign it an ID as well as the button. So input 1, and then the button needs an ID of custom button. Okay, and then now we need to go into the app.js, so the JavaScript app.js, and now we're going to create our JavaScript. So we're going to do const socket equals new WebSocket, and this is a globally accessible variable, so no need to worry about importing that. This is just JavaScript on the client side. And then we're going to do SWS semicolon // and then localhost, and our server is running on port 8000. So that's going to establish the connection. And then we need to do const button. We'll do send button equals document get element by ID. And then we named it, let's see here, custom button. So we're going to fetch that, and we're going to assign that to the send button. And then what we need to do socket on message, and then we're going to take that event, and we're going to log that, console log event. Okay, and now we need to do, we need to log that, the click of the button, essentially. So we're going to do send button, and then we're going to add event listener click, and then a callback with no variable or value in there. And then we're going to do const message equals message, and we're going to create this input, this variable in a second, message input value trim, and that's going to trim up the value from the input 1. So now we need to do that. So const message input equals document get element by ID. Oops, by ID. There's our button right there. Okay. Now, what do we want to do with that message? We want to socket send that, I guess. So we're going to take this socket, send this message. So if message exists, oops, and then we want to basically take the socket here and send the message. And then we're going to do message input, message input value equals nothing after it sends. So let's go ahead and see what this does. So here's the index.html. We should have a new client connected when we reload the page. So page is reloaded, and look, we got a new client connected. So the connection closed when I refresh this. So watch. When I refresh this, the connection closes and then reopens, persisting nonstop connections. So that way we don't have to poll like we talked about earlier. It's just always connected. Now let's try that message now. So we're going to enter nothing here, and we're going to send that. So we got something going on here. That's not doing what we want. So we're not getting that response. Let's check the code. So socket on close. It should be on message. Whoops. So now we should get the message logged here, and that's basically how you do WebSockets. So let's give this a reload. This was a tutorial. Okay, we're gonna click to send, and still not working. So we need to either the input is not updating the text or the message is not sending. Let's see here. We have the on-click handler here. Let's log that message to see if that's actually working. So we'll log that, see what value we get. Let's go here. I'm just type some random gibberish. Send. Oh, it might be in the client. Let's see. Socket on message is not a function. That's the error that we're getting here. Let's see. That is a callback. So this should be basically like, it should not be, it's not a function of WebSocket. It is actually just a listener like that, I believe. Let's give this a run. Let's see what this does. Reload. All right, so we're not getting that error anymore. This was a tutorial. And now we should see this on the server. So this was a tutorial. The message, that console log of that message, where was it? Right there. It does exist, so the socket should send, and we should have right there. There's our message. So now it's in a buffer format. You'll have to decode that. Just Google that or Stack Overflow that. But that's essentially how you do WebSockets. So that message is transmitted to every single client. Thank you for watching my video. I hope this was helpful. I hope you have a wonderful day. If you like my content, subscribe. It helps. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day.